now we have our speaker, Dick Peyla. Now, Dick grew up in Tower and was a part of our generation of the 50s, 60s, and 70s where we had a lot of fun in town. And he has a great story to talk about the way back when the Peylas came to the country and how they helped establish the Tower community, especially in the business world. So without further ado, I am introducing Dick, and I'm going to ask him to microphone.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy, for the nice introduction, and thanks to all of you for coming. This is a wonderful turnout. This is really good. Before I start, I thought I would maybe expand on or do what Nancy was trying to do, and that's make a very short, gentle commercial for the Tower-Soudan Historical Society. I joined it about a year ago, and it's just a small, fun, active group of volunteers who are making a difference around here. They're doing good things. The key word, of course, is volunteers. Like any volunteer organization, they need more volunteers. So just consider joining, consider donating, consider volunteering for one of these work projects, maybe at the museum or the train. Sounds like next year you can consider buying raffle tickets or maybe even join and help sell raffle tickets. So lots of opportunities to help. It's a good organization, they're doing good things, and the more help, the better. Thank you much. Enough of the commercial. Okay, the title of my talk then is An Incomplete History of the Arrowhead Garage and the Peyla Family. And it's definitely incomplete. I'm very old. I'm a memory-challenged person. I've forgotten more facts than I remember by now, I'm sure. I'm definitely a non-historian. And I took a job and moved away in 1970, so that's sort of where the story has to end today. An example of being a non-historian, I think, is the Anderson Garage here. Growing up, I just vaguely heard, oh, thank you very much. Yeah, please wave and shout and help me out here. Thank you. Vaguely, I vaguely remember when I was growing up that there was an Anderson Garage or the Anderson Garage or something, and somehow it was connected to the Arrowhead Garage, but I never really paid attention. I didn't ask any questions, and so now I kind of regret it. I wish I had learned more when I was small. So I guess my advice to everyone is if you're interested in your history or the local community history, now's the time. Ask questions now before there's no one else to ask, because someday they'll be asking you the questions. So, okay, so with that, I'll start with a saying that I heard from my father. I heard it every winter, all winter long, various versions of this. He would tell us how cold it is, and it was cold, it'd be 20 below. So he'd say, let's go to work, onward. Okay, here's what I'm going to try to do today. I'll start in 1882, I think. Peter Peyla came from northern Italy. He immigrated to the United States. So you can see how the spelling had been changed. In Italy, it was P-E-I, and when he came through Ellis Island, they changed the spelling of the family name. Then I've got some information on homesteading in the Vermilion Lake Township. And I wish I knew more about that, but I'll show you what we've got. And then we get to the garage finally. Start with the Anderson Garage and the Anderson Transportation business. And an offshoot of that, of course, was the Arrowhead Garage in somewhere about 1930. I'll touch on the Y store. The Peylas built the Y store. I don't know if you knew that or not. I've got one slide on World War II. I cover the entire war with 3 photographs in about 30 seconds. And then the good years, the good times in Tower-Soudan. The war was over, the mines were working, and very good business in those years. And that's when the garage sort of tripled in size. It expanded. I'll show some of that. And then, of course, the economy turned down, the mine closed, the garage was sold in 1970, and that's sort of the story will end. But just maybe to help keep you all awake, that my father loved anything with an engine that moved. He just was enthralled by that. And so I'll touch at the end of this, I'll touch on the Weasel, the 22 Dodge, the floating cars, and some of the early crazy snow sleds that they were using back in the 50s. And then I've noticed most people tend to fall asleep when I'm talking. So I've thrown a few questions in here throughout. So maybe when we get to them, maybe stay awake and wave your hands or shout out an answer or something. I have to start with a little thank you for where I gathered this information over the years. Of course, Grandma and Grandpa, cousins Julie and Sally, Julie Mickle and Sally Averill. They're here today. If you have any questions, ask Julie and Sally. And more cousins, George and Barb. George said he would handle all the hard questions today. I'll do the easy ones. And then we got great information from Mary Wild, who was one of my grandfather's sisters, one of the original 5 children. Her daughter, Betty Wild, was a school teacher in Cloquet, and she convinced Mary to write a nice history of homesteading out there in the township. So that helped a lot. And of course, my aunt and uncle, Patsy Nelton, and my uncle and aunts on my mother's side, the Fredericksons. I got a little bit of information from Dave Anderson, you know, the TV weatherman. Is Dave here today?
I'm here, Jack.
Hey, good, okay. So you can ask Dave questions also, good. Our distant cousin is Jean. She's in Ely, and she captured some of the very, very early history in Italy. And Billy Nemi, Billy led us on an interesting trek a couple of years ago, and some newspaper clippings from the Tower News, and then of course from my parents. Okay, onward, finally. Question for you, why doesn't anyone smile in these old time photographs? Just everyone I've looked at, they're never smiling. My great-great-grandfather came from northern Italy, that San Giorgio Canavese, if that's how you pronounce it. That's a small suburb of Turin in northwestern Italy, sort of an industrial area, maybe like Detroit. They make Fiat cars there these days. But a small industrial area in northern Italy. That's where they came from. This photo from 1893 shows the great-great-grandfather and grandmother and their 2 daughters. When this was taken, their 3 sons had already come to the U.S. One was, I think, one was in Illinois, one was in Ely, and then my great-great-grandfather here. Looking again at the photograph on the right, nobody's smiling. You see that again. That's Peter Peyla and his wife Agnes, and on the tall girl on the left side is Mary. She's the oldest daughter. She's the one who wrote this history of the living in the homesteading in the township. On the far right is Frances Peyla, the little girl on the far right. And next to her, this strange little fella wearing this strange little costume. That's my grandfather. I have no idea what he was wearing there. And then the babe was Joe Peyla, and then Georgie Peyla's father, Johnny Peyla, wasn't born yet when this picture was taken. So Peter was born in 1859. He worked in a textile factory next to his fiancée. They were actually engaged in Italy as far as I was able to figure out. He was 23 years old when he came to the United States. And all he had was a small bag of clothes and an English-Italian dictionary, maybe a little bit of money, but probably not much. But just came with basically nothing. He ended up in Coal City, Illinois, working in a coal mine. He did that for 2 years, and that's where he became a naturalized citizen. And as soon as he had a little money, he sent for Agnes, and then they got married right away in 1885. He had sort of a pioneer spirit. He heard there were better jobs in the iron ore mines in Minnesota, so he convinced Agnes to move to Sudan. He worked in the mine as a pump operator, and Agnes ran a boarding house and raised 5 children. They'd take in miners. She would make about 5 or 6 lunches every day, and then the kids would bring the lunches up to the mine for their boarders. And then, of course, the Depression hit, the Panic Depression, 1893 to 1897, I believe. And so what do? You're there, you've got 5 young kids, you've got no job, and you're out here in kind of the wilderness. So you apply for a land grant, and that's what he did. He somehow applied for a land grant signed by President McKinley in 1900, and he found it 4 days later. I'll touch on that on the next slide a little better. But basically it was south of the Y near the Pike River. He built a small 3-room log house. The family moved there in 1901, just small little kids, just moving out there into the woods. And they lived in this small little house for about 5 years. The story goes from this history that Mary Wild wrote, it took him 4 days to figure out where his property was. Here's a 1916 map of Vermilion Lake Township. And you can see, that's up here. This is Pike Bay up here. Here's the Y. You can see the Pike River snakes down here and goes around. Here's Peter Peyla's 80 acres right in here. It came to be known as the community of Peyla after a while. And then I guess he had 40 acres over here. Today, the question I had was how in the heck did he find where his 80 acres were? I Googled it. I don't know what we would do without Google, so I Googled it. And where were we? I didn't do that. It sounds like, based on what I found on Google, back then they didn't survey these townships. They'd survey the corners, like they'd know where this point was, and 6 miles away you'd know where this point was. And so you know where the 4 corners were. And it sounds like, from what I believe, they took a 50-foot surveying chain and a compass and just started walking through the brush and the woods and the rocks and over rivers. Somehow, after 4 days, he probably found one of these corners right here, or maybe within half a mile, I'm not sure. But after 4 days trudging through the woods, he figured out where his property was. That's kind of amazing to me. This is the picture that the family had heard about. There were stories about this little 3-room log house, and 2 bedrooms and one sort of a great room. We're not sure this is it, but this is we think so. So that might be the house where this family of 7 lived for about 5 years. And here's the cast of characters we'll be hearing. I'll talk about them further. In the front, on the left-hand side, is Ann and John Peyla. John is, again, George's father, and he built the first Y. He built and owned Glenmore Resort when the city of Babbitt and the city of White Lakes were built from scratch when those mines were opened. He was the lead carpenter for creating all of that. And John was a partner with the Y with his sister Frances here. This is Frances and Joe Rio. They were the owners and business partners of the Y for about 8 years or so, several years. Okay, then on the right, this is my grandfather and my grandmother. And my grandmother was Jenny Anderson. So that's this Anderson-Peyla connection right here. You can imagine the gossip 100 years or so when they got married. You've got an Italian Catholic marrying a Swedish Lutheran. And of course, seems like the Lutherans in this case won out, and that's why my family had Lutheran coffee for the last 60 years. Okay, up on the left, Joe and Frances Rio, so they ran the Y, and the story goes, Frances was a very good seamstress and a very good artist. I'll touch on that a little bit later. She was a painter. And Joe and Vesta Peyla in the middle. Joe is the manager, foreman of the St. Louis County Garage when it was on Main Street. The building was a big building between the Timber J and then the car wash on Main Street. And then on the far right, this is Mary Peyla and Mary and John Wild. They owned the center. She's the one who wrote this history about life in the township, in the wilderness homesteading. And they owned the Central Store on Main Street, which was where Sulu's and the Tower Bakery was. They owned that for several years in the 50s and then moved to Ely. Okay, and this history written by Mary Wild, thanks to her daughter Betty Wild, was put into the Tower News. Priscilla, remember when, sorry, uh, they were running the stories, and those were the days of the Burgess, sorry. Phyllis Burgess was running these columns many years ago, and George gave her this entire history to put in, and they ran for over a period of a few weeks. So some of you might have seen this history. I was thinking about reading the entire 10 pages to you, but I didn't. I just boiled it down just a little bit here, but life on the farm, just totally self-sufficient, off the grid. There was no grid back then, of course. No electricity, no water, no nothing. They had wonderful gardens. They had a lot of vegetables, a lot of hunting and fishing, and they made a little bit of money by selling the vegetables in town, and then of course logging. My grandfather, great-grandfather, and grandfather were definitely into logging. They described some trips to town. There wasn't, for several years, there wasn't even a real road. You'd drive over corduroy logs and rocks and stumps, and after half a day, you'd finally get to Tower if nothing broke. So they said they'd go to Tower about once a month, never in the winter. They just isolated all winter long in the winter. The kitchen just had a small wood stove, and that provided heat and cooking for the entire building, for the 2 bedrooms and the main room. And my great-grandmother would bring in newborn animals and have a little pen right behind the stove, right there in the house, to keep them warm if they needed it before they were ready to go outside. Entertainment, fun, very simple, just simple games, puzzles, a lot of time playing outdoors. Nearest family, nearest friends were about a mile away, and they talked about really nice paths back and forth, so they would be visiting the neighbors, but it took a while to get there, of course. And then the school, they said there was just a 1-room schoolhouse, 18 kids, all the grades were together, obviously. And they talk about using the outhouse out back in the wintertime. Okay, this then, after living in that little log house for about 5 years, they finally built this. And this is kind of amazing. Just cut and dried the lumber all by themselves, and somehow built this 2-story, 4-bedroom house. I don't know where you get windows and where you get lattice work and where you get doors 100 years ago, but maybe the Sears Roebuck catalog, I'm not sure. But quite, what? Can't. Babbage catalog? Savage? Ask George later. Thank you, George. And this is a later picture of the same house. Trees have grown up. I'm showing this just because I mentioned Francis Rio was quite an artist, and we've got several of these. This is a black and white photograph that Francis would hand color in. You can see the coloring that she did. She'd sort of hand paint some of these. So we've got several of these. They're quite fun. Okay, on the right is a monument that's out by the little church on the Wallstein Road, and I guess it was established it was put there in 1950 by the township people, and it commemorates those early settlers who moved there before 1903. And here you can see Mr. and Mrs. Peter Peyla were third on this list. They were one of the first 3 settlers out there, I guess. Peter was a very influential guy, I learned. He organized his first school. He was the foreman for the road building project. It took about 5 years, and they finally got a decent road back and forth to town. He was one of the few who could read and write. There were a lot of Finnish settlers there too, mostly Finnish with sprinkling of Italians, and he spoke Finnish and wrote Finnish also. So he would write people's letters for people and order things from the catalog for people, and quite influential here. And then he helped organize the township. At various times he held all these positions. But I think his claim to fame was the postmaster. He organized the post office. He started a petition to start the post office. And then he was the postmaster for 17 years while it was in existence. So quite a go-getter, influential guy. This is a picture of a picture that hangs in the little church by the Wallstein Road, by the Pike River, by the Pike River Bridge. And I don't know when it was taken. Little log post office. And again, you can see some of the painting, some of the coloring that Francis Rio added to some of these old pictures. Little memorabilia from the post office. This is a postcard we have in our collection. Postage was a penny, not a bad deal. Addresses were quite simple. You write someone's name there and a town, and it'll get there. This was written by Francis Peyla, later Francis Rio. And just very simple. Hello, Esther, I got a card a while ago. I think it was from you. I'm not sure. So what are you doing with yourself nowadays? I haven't seen you for such a long time. Say hello to Mabel. And up on the top, Francis wrote Peyla, Minnesota, and she put January 16, 1914. The official postmark was 1915. So probably like all of us, when the year changes, it takes us a little while to catch up. Okay, question number one, keep you awake. 2 years ago, cousin Julie and Billy Nemi organized a trek out on part of the Vermilion Trail. We walked through tall grass, past giant ant piles, fought off mosquitoes, wild animals, maybe a deer. And we're trying to find the foundation for the old post office 2 years ago. Any thoughts? A, B, or C? Show of hands for maybe no for B. We don't think we found it. It might have been back in this corner here. We're not sure, but after 100 years of growth, we definitely did not want to go in there. And just for old time's sake, I had to show this. This was the original sign at the Peyla Road. That's my father and I and our little son. And of course, our son is bigger and stronger and taller than me right now. Okay, now we're getting to the garage and the Andersons, finally. Cousin Julie Olson wrote this, I don't know, when she was in high school maybe, so a couple of years ago. In 1907, Mr. Henry Anderson, started a business that's still operating today. He lived in Sudan, he moved to Tower and became a partner with a livery stable. That livery stable burnt down, but he bought another one, and he started a freight hauling business and a passenger hauling business, and then he was hauling school kids back and forth to school. The passengers would probably be miners back and forth between Tower and Sudan. He talked about the school children in the winter. It was just 2 horses pulling a wagon. In the winter, it would be 2 horses pulling a sleigh. And they would just build an enclosure on the wagon, and they had a little coal stove burning inside to keep the kids warm. Sounded kind of scary. But it's a big business, 24 to 26 horses, and all the wagons and stuff that goes with it. And Dave Anderson, thanks Dave. Dave sent me this. This is an ad from the Tower News in 1915, advertising the livery business. And this is interesting, this is kind of fun. First class rigs for business and pleasure trips, hacks and carriages for weddings and funerals. Good business. And then on the bottom, dealers in hard coal. Coal business was very big back then. That's what people used to heat their homes, of course. And then automobile for hire. Maybe this is one of the first rental car businesses. I'm not sure. Back in 1915, people didn't know how to drive cars, so if you hired the automobile, you probably got a driver to go along with it, I hope. This isn't the actual school bus. This is the 1913 Model T school bus, so maybe it looked kind of like this, just one of the old original buses. Same thing now in 1920. Here's an ad for the bus line. Now it's running between Tower and Virginia, 2 trips per day. You look at the times, leaves here at 8, gets to Virginia, turns around and heads back a little after 10. So that probably took about an hour and 45 minutes or so to get between here and Virginia, if nothing broke. Which brings us to question number 2. This one's easy. This one's easy. What's the present day name of this transportation company? Shout of hands for C. Oh, exactly. Yeah. The Anderson franchise ended in 1926. A company in Hibbing, the Northern Transportation Company, bought the franchise. And a few years later, that company changed its name to the Greyhound Bus Line. So kind of fun. And at that time, a couple of years ago, when Julie wrote this, she got her information from the Anderson brothers, and then this is my grandmother, Jenny Anderson, and some of the information from one of Herman T. Olson's stories. All right, finally to the garage. That took a while, sorry. Okay, now we're looking up Main Street. On the top of Main Street here is the You Betcha building, formerly known as the Martella Drug Company, and then you can see about five buildings down is the Anderson Garage. It's not on the corner, it's one lot up from the corner. If we zoom in a little closer, you can see there's wooden sidewalks and the little wooden bridge here where a car could drive across the sidewalk and go into the building. It says acetylene welding here. Here's the same cars for hire, and up above it said trucks for hire also, so you could probably get a car with a driver. And here's the single gasoline pump. It's one of those, you'd pump it by hand, you'd fill up the sight glass with gasoline and then gravity drain it into your vehicle. Working for an oil company for many years, I just had to think about this gasoline. Before the octane scale was even invented, they were selling 40 octane. Once they figured out how to measure octane, I went back and looked at this, and back then they were selling gasoline. It was about 40 octane. It cost about 15 cents per gallon. And for any of you car nuts out there, cars had compression ratio, the engine's about 4-to-1, so 40 octane was really all you needed back then. Interesting. Okay, 1924. Here's the next photo that I found, and so now the Anderson Garage used to be right here, and now we're at the corner. You can look at the big trees here on the corner of Main Street. Great big popple trees, I guess. The sign, it said you can read Standard Oil. I can't read that last word, but probably Standard Oil Garage. I'm not sure. Single gas pump. What else? Maybe that's enough. Single gas pump trees. Okay. And there's you can see the outline, the ceiling, the roof line of a house right behind the garage building here. Jumping now to 1930, the roaring 20s were gone. The stock market had crashed in 1929, and the country was looking for the big depression for the next 10 years or so. And so the family story that I heard was that nobody wanted the garage. What do we do with this thing? What do the Andersons do with this? I think then my grandmother, Jenny Anderson, convinced my grandfather, James, to take over the garage. And so I guess James decided to do it. He took it over and bought it and started running it. You can see they're advertising battery service. Batteries were terrible back then. They needed a lot of help. Advertising minnows and ice, so sort of supporting the tourist industry. And in the picture, I was very fortunate. The family has got some very old photo albums, tiny little black and white photographs in them, but some of them had captions. They actually told who was in the photo, so that's where this came from. This is my grandfather, and this is Peyla Anderson when he was maybe 16 years old or so, and he happens to be Dave Anderson's grandfather. Interesting. That was the 1930s, so jumping now, changing subjects, but 1932, first Y store was built in 1932 by John Peyla, and it was a little log building on the other side of the highway. Soon after that, this one was built. And you can see Standard Oil products and gas pumps, a couple rental cabins here, and then here they're advertising minnows. So again, supporting or catering to the tourist industry, plus the locals. This is a heading, or sorry, just 1935 on the Wise letterhead. And they're talking about free camping grounds, so camping again, campers and tourist supplies, beautiful Lake Vermilion, and then what they have today, the gas station, groceries, etc. So again, catering to the tourist business sort of forever around here. On the right is a painting. I mentioned Peyla, Frances Rio. They'd cut slabs of small birch trees, and she would paint landscape pictures on them, and they would sell these in the Y. This is the one that our family has. If any of you would look in your closets or under the bed or in the garage, if any of you have any of these, let me know. I'd be interested in adding to my collection. 2002, jumping way ahead, members of the John Peyla family, John's side of the family came to say goodbye to the old original Y building. On the left are George and Barb, on the far right, George's brother, Bobby, and then lots of children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews in the middle. But that's when the original, or this major building was torn down, and they built what's there today. You can see up in this right-hand corner, ice cream. The OI was just, it was a tradition to get a huge ice cream cone there every summer. One wonderful, large, inexpensive ice cream cone. If you happen to Google Peyla, Minnesota, you get Wikipedia and you go to the Y. And if you look at this thriving metropolis, the population is 10. Okay, this is from 1937. A group of Tower businesses and Ely businesses got together and they created sort of an advertising map of the two lakes, Burnside and Vermilion. And of course, one of the advertisers was the Arrowhead Garage, James Peyla, proprietor. That's my grandfather. And you see all the normal services here. And again, coal. Coal was a really big business back then. Which brings us to hauling coal stories. Coal would come in a boxcar full of coal would come to the Tower Depot here. And if you open the doors of the boxcar, it would be boarded up and just totally full of coal. You had to climb up and squeeze yourself over the boards into the coal, and then you started shoveling. Once the truck was full, you'd drive the truck to the customer. You'd get a conveyor belt running with a little couple horsepower Briggs & Stratton, noisy, smelly engine. Conveyor belt would be running like crazy. You'd raise the box, and you'd meter out the coal through this little gate here, and the coal would fly into the coal bin. And that brings you to my little coal hauling, shoveling story. My dad won the bid one winter to provide the Sudan school with coal, and he did that by gambling that if you got an entire boxcar load of coal, you get cheaper by the ton. The more you buy, the cheaper it is. He was gambling that he could fit the entire boxcar load of coal into the coal bin of the Sudan school. So he got the bid, and the boxcar came full of coal, and he started hauling it up to Sudan, many, many truckloads. Finally, the Sudan school coal bin was getting full. There was still coal left in the boxcar. So they needed someone to crawl into the coal bin and start shoveling, pulling coal from the front to the back sides, up to the ceiling, just stuff it in anywhere you could. And of course, that was me. That was I was probably 13, 14 years old or so. Probably weighed 100 pounds soaking wet, so I could squeeze in there. So I spent the next 3 or 4 hours in there shoveling, pushing the coal back, and finally we were successful. We got all the coal from the boxcar, got into the coal bin. I remember going home, I was just covered, just totally black. And I drank a whole quart of milk. My mom gave me a whole quart of milk to drink after that. And I decided I didn't want to be a coal hauler after that. Okay, 1940. Here's Main Street, still dirt. I think they now had concrete sidewalks. Standard Oil products, 3 gas pumps, and again the tourist information, the tourist industry. So advertising, helping the tourists. That's part of the business. Um, Tourist information, Lake Vermilion, where to go and how to get there. They probably said go to one of the resorts on the lake, walk down to the harbor, and get on one of the Arnson boats, and they'll take you there. That was probably it. You can still see the Uecha store here, but now there's only about 3 buildings in the way, slowly getting smaller. People jaywalking, way back then, they were jaywalking. Here's my one chart on World War II. The men either worked in the mine or went to the armed services, and that, of course, left the women to stay home and run the country. This is my father. He was an instructor in the motor schools first in California and then in Georgia. And then he helped, he went to Germany with General Patton's army and helped to run the convoys across Germany. But the important part here is Patsy. So I don't know, she was 17 years old here maybe, and she just did everything in the garage. This is an old Dodge. You can read the hubcap, big old dirty white walls. Patsy's changing oil in this car. Back then, oils were thick and dirty, and the best oil change was if you had a real hot engine and the oil was hot, and then you pulled the drain plug. You got the most of the oil out of it. So you get the car hot, you'd bring it in on the lift, raise it up on the hoist. Patsy would push this oil drum, catch oil basin underneath, raise up the funnel, and as hot oil was dripping off her hand, off her fingers, she'd try to pull that oil plug out without dropping it and catching and spilling all this old oil onto the floor. So just amazing. So I guess she did tune-ups and sold gas and changed oil and grease jobs, all those things. And I never knew that. I wish I had asked more questions back then. Every garage has to have some romance, of course. Uncle Elton drove a truck delivering milk for Bridgman Russell. And he met Patsy in the garage. Patsy would be selling gas. This is a quote from Patsy. Elton would stop for gas almost every day and hardly ever needed much. So they ended up getting married in 1949. Okay, jumping back a couple of years, 1945. This is just a newspaper clipping, one of those greetings where the businesses sort of say thank you to the townsfolk each year. And just it's fun for me seeing these old names. Here's Herman Olson, the red and white store. Standard Motor Company, owned by David Anderson. This is Desnoy's garage. When Dave Desnoy Sr. came back from the war, he bought this garage. This is Desnoy's Standard Motor Company. This is Bob Standard at the other end of town, the Vermilion Garage. Chivoti owned it. John Muir owned a big store on Main Street. We used to have a theater, the Rex Theater, the Box Factory, Sedan's only store, the Oliver Club of Sedan. Here's the Arrowhead Garage. It's James E. Peyla. So again, that's still my grandfather in 1945. Dr. Schaefer, the Stefanich's, Cons Martella. And way down here, the service garage by Burgess. That's Burgess's Chevrolet. So just it's fun for me seeing these old names. And I have to remember Mother. Behind every good man is a great woman, of course. The middle picture shows my mom shooting a bolt-action .22 rifle, and that's a family heirloom. We still have that today. It's probably 100 years old or so. Mom wasn't always as prim and proper as she led the townspeople to believe. She would tell stories that there used to be a great swimming hole down behind the iron ore bar on the East 2 River, and they'd spend all summer long playing down there. This is my mother right here. A little bit of a risque operation, it looked like. Other stories she would tell. When the pilings were new in the river, they would walk out all the way on the pilings out into Pike Bay, and sooner or later one of them would fall in and get soaked. They'd climb back up go all the way back to Tower, change clothes, get dry, walk out again, and fall in again. But that's that's one of the things they did back there in the summer. Okay, logging. These guys, they really worked hard back then. Oh my goodness. Kids today have no concept of what real work was, I think. But this brings to a story from my grandfather. They were logging down near the Pike River, and of course you cut the logs, you put them in the river to float down the river over the dam into Pike Bay. And I guess it was the second brother's job, Joe Peyla. He was stationed at the Pike River Bridge, and his job was to poke the logs through so they would flow under the bridge and down to Pike Bay. The loggers say they were working, and all of us, they said they watched the water level of the river slowly rise. And they said something's wrong. So they ran about a quarter mile down to the bridge and saw this huge log jam. Joe Peyla was sleeping on the bank of the river. And he said they took a stick of dynamite to blow that up and get the logs flowing again. Okay, now 1947, same thing, same small building, just a one stall garage. Here's the roof line of this house in the back still. And again, here it says information, so still catering to the tourism industry. 1949, now my father took over the business and he had a grand opening. This is the 1922 Dodge, and they didn't have sound cars back then, so I was only 1 year old back then. So I'm guessing he probably hopped in this car with this advertisement on it, and would drive around town blowing the ooga horn. This car had a wonderful ooga horn, and I'm guessing that's what he did. So anyhow, 1949, my father took it over. He was about 27 years old then. Back then, cars burned a lot of oil, leaked a lot of oil. So instead of selling, in addition to selling gas, you can see there's always lots and lots of oil cans around. I remember one of my jobs was always keeping these racks of oil cans full. Quick picture inside, my father, Elton Olson, Glenn Anderson, lots of oil cans, lots of antifreeze cans, Gold Bond stamps, and of course the famous penny candy machines that most garages had. Everyone who worked in a garage soon figured out that if you used a little feeler gauge for setting the points in a car, you could stick that in where the penny goes, and you could just spin the handle as much as you wanted, and all the candy would come out. Okay, next question. What happened to the house? There's a nice hedge here. There's still the trees. Okay, so torn down, moved, burned down, or both? Both? Let's try both. Like when Dave was telling us about the Martella history, they moved buildings back then. It's amazing. Somehow they jacked the house up, they got a truck underneath it, drove it through town, somehow dug a hole and slid it into place and built a basement underneath, and none of the windows broke. It's just incredible. But of course, it burned down after many, many years. I think Dave Desnoy sent me these pictures. I think it was the February when it burned. Fighting fires in a small town in the dead of winter in northern Minnesota was not easy. And here's what's left of it. Okay, 1952, 4th of July parade. You can see Bella Oberg's great big White House here. And the reason for showing this is the roof line had changed. And instead of that house, which is now gone, you can see the first addition to the garage. So instead of a small one-stall garage, it was now a small two-stall garage. 1954, this is the picture of the Beast. Oh, what a truck. Great big bumper for push-starting cars back then. You could do that. 24-hour service. But here's the next edition. So again, business was good. Early 50s, business was good. Father had enough money to move the house and build these two additions. This about tripled the garage in size back then. And there's another door back here on the left side. Lots and lots of wrecker stories, starting cars 30 below zero, trying to start cars in 30 below zero, and then pulling them out of the ditch. Uh, Too many to go into. I'll just show this one. This is my thought here. Rescuing drivers at 2 a.m. All right. 2 a.m. on a school night in the winter, 20 below zero, with a real education. So I went on a few of these. I would pull out the cable of the wrecker, find a big piece of the suspension to hook it on, and then Dad would push a button and the car would come out. He tells one story where someone had stayed in a bar much too long in Ely, coming home around midnight in the winter, and went in the ditch, of course, and needed to be pulled out. So my dad went, pulled him out, and he said, "Follow me to town." So my dad was driving the wrecker. He was watching in the mirror. The car he had just pulled out. About a mile, he went right in the ditch again. So my dad pulled him out again and put the driver. This is not that person, of course. Put the driver in the car, just passed out in the car. Attached the car to the wrecker, chained it up. Drove to the garage, drove right into the heated garage. Dad went home to sleep and left the guy chained to the wrecker sleeping. Okay, winter driving on the lake. This is a story from my grandfather. 1920s, crossing Pike Bay. The cars didn't weigh much then, but if you got thin ice, it didn't matter. He said they would put the car in gear and get it moving, and then they'd open the door, one foot on the gas pedal, one foot leaning out on the running board. So if the car broke through, they could jump through without going through the ice. So here's the question: has the car ever crashed into an island on Lake Vermilion? Yes? No? Maybe? Yes? Absolutely. I don't know any details. Again, I didn't ask enough questions back then, but this absolutely with a car that hit an island. Don't know why, but there's 365 islands out there, so you got to be careful. Okay, now 1955, I got this photograph. If you look carefully, you can see a TV antenna here. It's probably aimed at Duluth. And I believe the Arrowhead Garage is one of the first televisions in town. George tells a story where he and some boys would come down and look through the window, and they'd see the picture, and then it would turn to snow, and then it would come back and you see the picture again. But in this garage and many other garages in town, maybe not the old timers, but the guys, they'd gather most evenings, they'd smoke, chew, spit, gossip, and watch television. Again, this you can see some of the coloring that Francis Rio did. You can see this was the black and white photo that has been colored. One of the highlights was always getting new cars. So here's two 1955 Plymouths being delivered. You can still see dirt road, dirt side streets in Tower. It's a small town, a small dealership. If you're lucky, you sold 5, maybe 10 new cars on a really good year. So again, you didn't see these very often, but when they did, they were kind of fun to look at the new cars. 1956, does anyone remember the Snow Capers? Nobody? A couple, good. There'd be winter parades, the Winter Snow Capers Parade. There'd be the queen, some girl, maybe a senior in high school, who sold the most tickets would be queen for the day or queen for the parade as fundraising, of course. I know it's 1956. This is the 1956 Dodge, and somebody's riding on it. I vaguely remember, I don't remember much of these activities, but I remember they used to have sled races or sled distance contests. The boys would gather way up on the alley behind Mears' house, up even on the alley behind North 3rd Street. And if you got in just the right icy track, you could slide down that hill all the way across the ball field, and you would end up on North 2nd Street. And I remember once I won that year, I think I won 50 cents. It was wonderful. Okay, 1957, another highlight would be the new car introductions. Back then, every car company, the Chevys, Fords, Dodges, they would all introduce their cars on the same day. It used to be a big deal. I wish they still did that, but of course they don't. But here, the new cars would be kept hidden. They'd be parked somewhere else, a different garage, or covered up and way in the back of the building, perhaps. Then finally, on the showing day, they'd come out, and town people would come and look at them. The boys would go from dealership to dealership, looking at all the new cars. And back then, we look at the engines, and these days, we just count the cup holders. This is the letterhead from 1958, and it shows General Electric Appliances. Oh, I forgot. One of those older photos, it showed 3 refrigerators in the window of the garage. I forgot to mention that. And I spent hundreds of hours in that garage. I never once heard of selling appliances. I don't know. So maybe this refers, you might have sold 3 television sets, I'm not sure. But Dodge and Plymouth cars, coal and gravel hauling, and the normal car accessories here. This is just one photograph of the gravel business. Arrowhead Garage had 2 single axle trucks. They would hold about 5 yards of dirt, and I remember a single load cost about $6. I don't know, probably $150 today, I'm not sure. And you could make money by at $6 a load if you owned a gravel pit, and if you had the loader to load the truck, and if you had a good truck driver, and if nothing broke while you're hauling it. Okay, letterhead from 1963. Here it switched to Texaco. The coal business was dying and basically had gone away. And so my father needed some other business to replace it. So the story goes, he was driving down to Florida, they were going down for a vacation to visit the Argents in Florida. And he said he saw a Texaco station in every state of the union as he was driving down. And at that time, Texaco did sell retail in every single state. So that's how he chose Texaco. And what else is here? So Scott Outboard Motors, Dodge Cars and Trucks, a little bit of bulldozing, gravel hauling, and now the fuel oil business. 1963, here's a photo of the Texaco garage. This is the only photo I've got, or that I could find, which says Texaco on it. And back here is the old Power Wagon. What a wonderful machine that was. We're almost done. There were many, many employees, but it was a very small business. So the full-time employees would be my father and 1 mechanic, and then a lot of part-time people. If you needed gravel hauling, someone would do that. If you needed kids to sell gas up front, they'd get kids to do that, myself included. The first mechanic I remember was Merlin Lindquist. His son was Alan. And then when Merlin moved away, Clarence was the mechanic, and Kenny and Peanuts worked in the garage. Patty Napier drove trucks. I remember he drove the big coal truck. After they stopped shipping coal in boxcars, he still did a little bit in trucks. Joe Messagetic hauled gravel. Bill Hilton worked in the garage up front selling gas. Hubert Sundsdahl, I think Hubert worked for the mine. He was a really good diesel mechanic. And once in a while, a diesel engine would need help, a diesel truck, and Dad would ask Hubert to help, and he'd do it on weekends or evenings. I remember I learned a lot of good, colorful language from Hubert. Terry Anderson worked in the garage, Dave's father. Richard Lenzen, Butch Marla drove trucks. John Peterson. Joe Scala was a painter. It's either Joe or Jack. I think it's Joe. But he painted cars in the back of the building. And there's others. So maybe if some of you remember some others, maybe come up and let me know later on. I'd be interested. Okay, we're almost done. Some of the unique vehicles. Again, anything that had an engine that moved, my dad he was enthralled with it or so. Here's the Power Wagon and the Weasel. The Power Wagon, just fabulous truck, tough as nails. But of course it rode like that too, like it had no springs at all. And if you got the truck going just the right speed and the engine going just the right speed, you could shift gears without grinding. It was quite an art. But then if you did grind the gears, they were so tough it didn't matter anyhow. Here's the Weasel. This is a flat bottom duck boat. So it looks like Peyla Anderson and my dad were off playing. They're off trying to go duck hunting here. Here's the weasel, Army surplus weasel. It was amphibious, so it floated and of course went on land. Two nice big tracks. It would hold 4 soldiers. One driver plus 3 soldiers could sit in the back. And here they're using it for working. I have no idea where my father got this thing, but again, I should have asked more questions back then. In Duluth? Ah, good. From who? Where'd you get it? Ah, come catch me later. Yeah. Good. And here's a story, of course, where it didn't float very well. My dad and I were trapping minnows in Little Lost Lake. It was about 1965. And what you do, you drive out on Highway 1 on the way to Cook, and you'd park, and you'd take the weasel off the trailer, and you drive 2 miles through the brush and swamp and bog. You get to Little Lost Lake, you set a couple minnow traps, and you hope you catch some minnows. And that kind of tells you the minnow business was not very profitable. It's much more of a hobby or a loss leader than anything. But anyhow, my dad drove in, we set the minnow traps, and then I drove out. And just as I was starting, I was in the same tracks where he came in on. It was probably not a good idea. But all of a sudden, it just dropped 2 feet down. We were just stuck. I stepped on the gas, and the standard transmission jumped out of gear, and we were stuck. But the thing floats. It was amphibious. It's designed to float. So we were 2 miles out there in the wilderness, in the bog, dead silence. All you could hear was a little bit of water trickling in. So the question was, would it freeze solid and still be there the next morning, or would it sink? And of course, it sank. But about 2 months later, after everything froze really solid, and a lot of the good old guys in town went out there and formed an expedition. They had a long metal pole about 20 feet down there to clunk, so they found it. Somehow they hooked a chain onto the front bumper somehow, and then they pulled it out with a bulldozer, and they rescued the darn thing. Once they got it back in, Dad put a new engine in and an automatic transmission and continued using it. Just a good story there. I think Dave Anderson put this photo of his grandfather, Peyla, helping rescue the weasel. 22 Dodge, wonderful car. This was a great parade car for Tower. Dad kept it down by the box factory in Phil Bolio's garage. He was always worried that it would burn down. But he would start every year, just put some air in the tires, charge the battery, and it would start right up and dependable as could be. It had a great Auga horn. I drove it a few times. And for you gearheads, the spark advance with a manual lever up by the steering wheel. If you needed to change the spark advance, you had to move this lever. So there's a little bit of an art to drive this thing, but it was wonderful. I remember parking it up by the school with the top down, watching the fireworks display at night when they used to shoot the fireworks off the football field. And next, the floating cars. There were 2 floating cars, the green one and then later a red one. And again, these are great parade cars. Dad would have them in most of the parades. This is Mary Beth Williams, Mary Beth Reller now. So she was queen for something, probably a 4th of July something. Here's National Safe Boating Week. This is, I think, 1965. Here's the car parked on the beach in an Echo Point. And then here's the red one. This is me driving in the river with my grandfather's beagle, Louie. This was a terrible car. It was a terrible car and a terrible boat. It had 2 big propellers under the back bumper. You could shift it into reverse in the water, but if you did that, water would just come over the engine and you'd probably sink. So you didn't want to do that. Just one story, we'd be living at Echo Point in the summer, and we'd take this to work in the morning. So this nice, beautiful morning, we'd have the top down, crossing between Echo Point, crossing the Narrows, and coming out on Puncher's Point. Nice calm day, and I remember a big boat went by in front of us, and we kept going, and we watched the big waves come slower and slower towards us. And I remember the wave broke right on the hood of the car, washed up the windshield, and just dumped in our laps. but we turned on the bilge and we made it. So fun story. Okay, now the snow sleds. We're almost done. These were crazy machines back in the 50s. This is just three real wide skis. The front ski would be connected to a steering wheel inside. Just a little tubular frame with some inexpensive tin wrapped around to form the body. A gas pedal with a cable that went to this airplane engine, and the biggest, nastiest propeller you could imagine on the back. You didn't want to be anywhere, don't be within 20 feet of that thing. It was terrible. Noisy as can be. They would go pretty well, but they would get stuck a lot also. And if there's any slush on the ice, they would just bog down into that slush, and you had to have help to get out. Which brings us to the last question. What's the Lake Vermilion speed record for a 1950 snow sled? 40, 75, or really fast? 100 plus. Let's try that. I can't remember the article, but this is my recollection of an article that was in the Tower News. It was written by George Wells, and he was the father of the Wells brothers. This was in the Tower News somewhere. So sometime in the 50s, the Wells brothers made a 2-mile course on a nice, smooth, big bay. Maybe they put a pine tree at the start. 2 miles away, they put another pine tree. They got a flying start, fast as they could. They hit the starting point. They hit the stopwatch. And then they hit it again 2 miles later. And the quote in the article was, "We almost lost control and started flying." They went 2 miles in 65 seconds, which is 110 miles an hour. Crazy. And we're almost done. The garage was sold in 1970, sold again in 1976. At that time, it was renamed the Arrowhead Dodge. Sold again 6 years later, renamed Classy Cars, and then it sat for 38 years or so until Miranda rescued it. Thank you, Miranda. It really helped the beginning of Main Street. Got rid of an eyesore, and we got the idea warehouse. And we're done. No summary, no conclusions. Ask me the easy questions. Ask George the hard questions. Thank you very much. I hope it's easy. Oh, I don't remember, but I'm guessing electric start, but I don't know. Good question. Yeah. Any more? Yes.
What happened to you getting in cars? I got to ride in a red car when I was a young girl.
Ah, good.
What happened to it?
I don't know. The cars would have problems with the door seals, and the rubbers would get old and weak, and they'd start leaking. I think that's why he got rid of the green one. But I don't know where he got the green one. I don't know where he got the red one, so I don't know. Sorry. I wish I'd asked more questions. Yeah. Any more? Yes.
What happened to the 22 Dodge?
Oh, the 22 Dodge. Good question. That was a good car. But again, as I mentioned, he was worried that he kept it in the garage down by the box factory most of the time. And the owner of the building was getting very old and frail, and my dad was worried that his house would burn down someday, including the Dodge. So he sold it in 1965, and instead he bought a 16-foot red fiberglass boat, which we called Big Red, and we used it for 50 years. Any? Yeah. Sorry? Same thing. I don't know. I'm not a historian. I wish I had asked more questions. Yeah, good question.
I got one more for you then, Dan.
Okay.
I'm going to come up actually.
Oh, good. And any hard questions for George? George is here.
In my family photo album, Dick, all right,
Okay, good.
I'll do it loud too. In my family photo album, Dick, my dad Terry took a picture of Sonny driving the Amphicar in the 4th of July parade, 66.
Yeah.
And it's got the banner on the back for National Safe Boating Week.
Ah, okay.
Now, as a Coast Guard auxiliarist myself, I know that Lake Vermilion had an auxiliary flotilla back in the 50s and 60s with Mrs. Wells as the flotilla
Ah, yeah,
commander.
yep.
So was Sonny a member of the auxiliary? Is that why he was taking part in Safe Boating Week?
I doubt it.
Darn.
I remember Mrs. Wells, and I'm sure she got him to put these
Mrs. Wells
these
died in
signs.
2003.
Okay. Ah. Okay. And just for fun, you can look at the life preserver he's got here. He's got an inner tube on the back here. All right. Any others? One last chance. Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.